The morning my son changed the locks, I was still wearing my black suit from the cemetery. I hadn't even taken off my tie yet. Margaret had picked that tie for me 3 Christmases ago, deep burgundy with small silver threads running through it. She said it brought out the gray in my eyes. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I just remember standing on the porch of the house I built with my own hands in 1987, pressing my key into the lock and feeling it catch on nothing, turning against empty air, and the first thing my mind went to was that tie. My son opened the door before I could knock. "Dad," he said, not a greeting, a statement, like he was identifying a piece of furniture that had arrived at the wrong address. I looked at him, 34 years old, my height, Margaret's eyes. He was wearing a polo shirt I didn't recognize, and behind him I could see his wife standing near the kitchen island, with her arms folded, watching. "The lock," I said. "We needed to make some changes." He didn't step back to let me in. "We've been talking about this for a while, Dad. The house is in both our names now. You signed the papers last year, remember? When we refinanced." I did remember. Margaret had been in her second round of treatment. I'd been sleeping 4 hours a night. My attorney had sent documents, and I'd signed them at the kitchen table at midnight because my son had said it would help with the taxes, and Margaret had squeezed my hand and said she trusted him. "I need my clothes," I said. "My tools." Margaret's eye stopped. "Her things are still inside." "We'll box everything up," his wife said from behind him. She hadn't moved from the kitchen. "We'll leave it on the porch by Thursday." Thursday. It was Monday. Margaret had been in the ground for 6 hours. "I want you to understand something about who I am before I go any further. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I built bridges. I calculated load tolerances and material fatigue, and the exact mathematical point at which a structure fails. I am not a man who raises his voice. I am not a man who makes decisions without thinking them through. I have made it 63 years on this earth by being methodical and patient and precise. I stood on that porch and I did not say a single word. I walked back to my car. I drove to the Motel 6 on Route 9 because it was the closest thing I could think of. I sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like industrial detergent, and I looked at my hands for a long time. Then I called my friend Dale, who has known me since we were both 26 years old and working on the same highway project outside Columbus. He picked up on the second ring, and when I told him what happened, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Come stay with me." I said, "I just need a day to think." He said, "Arthur, come stay with me." I went. Dale lives 40 minutes east in a house he shares with his golden retriever and 7,000 books. He made coffee and didn't ask questions for the first 2 hours, which is exactly why we have been friends for 37 years. When I finally started talking, I talked for a long time. He listened to all of it, the refinancing papers, the lock, the polo shirt, the Thursday deadline. When I finished, he said, "Did Margaret know?" I said I didn't think so. I said Margaret trusted everyone, but especially our son. She had loved him in that specific way that mothers love difficult children, not blindly but stubbornly, with a kind of faith that refuses to be argued with. Dale nodded slowly. Then he said, "Did she leave a will?" She had. Of course she had. Margaret was the organized one in our marriage. She kept every receipt, every warranty card, every birthday card we'd ever been given in labeled folders in a filing cabinet in the study. When the doctors first found the tumor, she had sat down and written out a 12-page document titled, in her careful handwriting, "Things Arthur Will Need to Know." The will left the house jointly to me and our son. She had believed, until the end, that we would figure it out together. What she had not told me about what I didn't know existed until 8 days after the funeral was the storage unit. I found out because of a bill. Dale had let me use his address for mail forwarding while I sorted things out. One morning, mixed in with sympathy cards from Margaret's former co-workers, there was a statement from a storage facility called Clearwater Self-Storage, 20 minutes from our house. The account was in Margaret's name. The autopay had been charging her credit card for 3 years. The unit number was printed on the statement, 114. I sat with that paper for a long time. I had not known we had a storage unit. In 38 years of marriage, this was not something we had discussed. We had a basement. We had a garage. Margaret was not a person who accumulated things she didn't use. She donated clothes every spring, cleared the pantry every January, kept surfaces clean. There was no reason, as far as I understood our life, for a storage unit. I drove there on a Tuesday afternoon. The woman at the front desk confirmed the account was in my late wife's name and asked to see ID and the death certificate, which I had a copy of in my glove compartment because I had learned quickly in those first weeks that you always need a death certificate. She typed for a moment and then said that Margaret had added me as an authorized user 18 months ago. 18 months ago, while she was still in treatment, while things were still uncertain but not yet impossible. Unit 114 was in the back of the building, climate-controlled, behind a blue roll-up door. The key on the statement fit the padlock. I remember my hand was steady when I opened it, which surprised me, because my chest felt like something was sitting on it. Inside, there was a folding table, a plastic shelving unit, and 11 banker's boxes arranged in 2 neat rows. On top of the first box, in Margaret's handwriting, was a sticky note that said, "Arthur, start here." I sat down on the concrete floor because there was nowhere else to sit, and I opened the first box. On top was a letter, 4 pages, front and back, in her handwriting. I want to read you part of it, not all of it. Some of it is only for me. But she wrote, "By the time you find this, I won't be there to explain it in person, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but mostly I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't tell you because I knew you, Arthur. I knew you'd want to fix it, and some things can't be fixed while they're still happening. Some things you just have to document." I had to stop reading. I sat there for probably 20 minutes before I could continue. What Margaret had documented, across 11 boxes organized by date and category, was everything. She had started 3 years before she got sick, not because she was sick, but because she had noticed things, small things at first. A conversation overheard between our son and his wife on Thanksgiving where they were discussing the house situation and what would happen when the time came. Alone, our son had asked her for $60,000 to cover what he called a business setback that he had never repaid and had, over subsequent months, begun to refer to as a gift. Pressure, gentle at first and then less gentle, to refinance the house, to simplify the assets, to get things organized. Margaret was an accountant for 22 years before she retired. She understood exactly what was being organized and why. She hadn't told me because she knew I would confront our son directly, and she was afraid of what that would do to the family. She had 2 grandchildren she adored. She believed, even while she was documenting everything, that if she could just outlast the pressure, if she could just stay well long enough, our son would find his footing financially, and the grasping would stop. She didn't stay well long enough. So instead, she documented. The boxes contained bank statements, printed email exchanges, a log she had kept in a small notebook of dates and conversations, photographs, and copies of every document our son had ever asked either of us to sign. She had sticky notes on everything not accusatory, just precise. Dates circled, amounts underlined, questions written in the margins. Why was this necessary? Compare to previous statement. Ask Dale's accountant about this. There was also a sealed envelope labeled, "For your attorney. Do not open without legal counsel present." I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia, and she has handled my affairs for 15 years. I drove to her office with the sealed envelope and the first box, and I sat across from her desk and watched her read for 45 minutes. When she looked up, her expression was careful. "Arthur," she said, "do you have the rest of the boxes?" I told her there were 10 more. She said, "Can you bring them tomorrow?" I said yes. Then she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Did you know any of this?" I told her the truth. I had known none of it. I had signed things I shouldn't have signed because I was exhausted and grieving in advance, and I had trusted my son the way you trust family, which is to say, without verification. I told her that Margaret had protected me by not telling me, and I had failed to protect her by not paying attention, and I wasn't sure which of those things was the greater failure. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Arthur, your wife didn't just document things. She built a case." I didn't fully understand what she meant until she walked me through the sealed envelope. Inside was a 7-page memo Margaret had written to herself, dated 14 months before she died. It laid out, in the precise language of someone who had spent 2 decades in accounting, a clear and documented pattern of financial manipulation. The loan that became a gift, the refinancing that had shifted equity, 3 separate instances where our son had used Margaret's credit card number, which he'd had for emergencies for purchases she had not authorized, totaling just over $11,000. And at the end of the memo, a single paragraph that began, "If I am not here to present this in person, I want it on record that none of these actions were taken with my full informed consent." I was under medical stress and deliberately approached during periods of vulnerability. She had signed it and had it notarized. 14 months before she died, while she was still hoping she would be wrong, Margaret had found a notary and had her suspicions legally witnessed. I have built bridges for 31 years. I understand load tolerances. I understand what it means when a foundation has been quietly reinforced without anyone noticing. Margaret had reinforced this foundation while I was looking the other way, and it held. Patricia filed a petition to contest the refinancing within the month. She argued undue influence and fraud, supported by Margaret's documentation. My son hired an attorney, a good one, I heard, and for a period of about 5 months I heard from him only through legal correspondence. His wife called me once to tell me I was destroying the family. I listened to her speak for about 2 minutes, and then I said, "Margaret built this family. Not you, not my son, Margaret." And she left instructions. Then I hung up. I went back to Clearwater Self-Storage many times during those months. Sometimes I just sat in the unit and went through boxes slowly, not looking for anything specific, just reading. Margaret had kept things I didn't know she'd kept: a birthday card I'd given her the year we got engaged, with a drawing she'd made in the margin of a bridge, because she thought it was funny that I was always talking about bridges. A photograph of the two of us, from 1991, standing in front of the frame of the house before the walls went up. I'm holding a level and she's laughing at something off camera. And I remember that day. I remember exactly what she was laughing at. A neighbor's dog had gotten into the worksite and stolen someone's sandwich, and the specific quality of that memory, arriving without warning in a storage unit in November, is something I can't fully explain. I'll just say that I understood, sitting there, that she had been thinking of me the whole time. Not just documenting, thinking of me. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly, with long quiet stretches and then sudden bursts of activity that required my attention and then went quiet again. Patricia was methodical. She told me early on not to expect a fast resolution and to keep my expectations about the house realistic. "The refinancing is the harder piece," she said. "The fraud on the credit cards is cleaner." I asked her what she thought Margaret would have wanted. Patricia looked at me over her glasses. "I think she wanted you to be okay," she said. "I think the legal case was the mechanism, but being okay was the point." I thought about that for a long time. In March, almost 6 months after the funeral, my son called me, not through attorneys, his own number on a Sunday morning. I almost didn't answer. When I did, there was a long pause. Then he said, "Dad." I waited. He said, "I've been talking to someone, a therapist. She asked me to call you." Another pause. I'm not calling to negotiate anything. Patricia's people and my people can handle all that. I just wanted to say." He stopped. I could hear him breathing. Mom knew everything. "I know," I said. "She never said anything to me. She never... Taima." His voice broke in a way I hadn't heard since he was maybe 12 years old. "She just kept being nice to me, right up until the end." I didn't know what to say to that. It was true. It was completely and exactly true. Margaret had known what he was doing for at least 3 years, had documented every instance of it, had notarized her own testimony against him, and had never once been less than kind to him in person. Not because she was a pushover, because she had decided, somewhere in that careful mind of hers, to separate the love from the reckoning. "She loved you," I said. "That didn't change." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I need to fix this." I said, "Start with the attorney." The settlement was finalized in June. My son and his wife signed over their claim to the house. The credit card fraud resulted in repayment, plus damages. There were other financial entanglements Margaret had documented, that I won't detail here. Some are still being resolved, but the core of it was done. I moved back into the house in July. I reseeded the lawn, which had gone patchy, and fixed the porch rail, which had been loose since the previous winter. I put Margaret's photograph back on the mantel, the one from our 25th anniversary, where we're standing in front of a bridge I worked on in Zanesville, and she's wearing the green dress she always wore when she wanted to embarrass me by looking better than I deserved. The storage unit is empty now. I brought everything home. The boxes are in the study, in the filing cabinet she kept for 30 years, organized the way she organized everything by date, by category, with labels you can read from across the room. My son and I have dinner once a month. It's still uncomfortable sometimes. There are silences that last longer than they should, and topics we don't bring up, and whole territories of our history that we're both moving carefully around. His wife does not join us yet. Maybe someday. I don't know. But he comes. And I cook whatever's easy, usually something with pasta, because Margaret used to say I had two cooking modes, pasta and calling for pizza. And we sit at the table in the kitchen, and we talk about his kids, who I see every other weekend now, and about work, and about the news, and sometimes about nothing in particular. Last month, he helped me replace the gutters. We were up on ladders at opposite corners of the house, and it was late afternoon, and the light was doing something particular through the maples in the backyard, that orange October light that makes everything look like the last day of something good. He called across the roof to ask me a question about the flashing. Should have been obvious, but he was double-checking, and I called back the answer, and there was a moment, just a moment, where it felt like it used to. Before all of it. I don't know if we'll get back there. I don't think I know enough about the load tolerance on something like this. How much fracture a relationship can sustain before the repair is stronger than the original, or whether the original is just gone. I built bridges for 31 years, and I still couldn't tell you for certain. What I can tell you is this. Margaret knew she might not make it. She knew, and instead of using her energy only on fighting the cancer, though she fought that too, every day, with the same methodical stubbornness she brought to everything, she also used it to make sure I would be all right afterward. She drove to a storage facility. She organized 11 boxes. She found a notary. She added my name to the account 18 months before she died, so that I would be able to access it when I needed to. She did all of that quietly, without telling me, without asking for credit, without letting it harden her into someone who stopped being kind to the people she was documenting. I think about that a lot. I think about the kind of love that can hold two things at once. Fierce protection and unconditional warmth without letting either one corrupt the other. I am 63 years old. I have learned a great many things about structure and failure and what holds and what doesn't. Margaret taught me more about all three than 31 years of engineering ever did. If you're watching this and you have someone like that in your life, someone who is quietly, methodically, patiently making sure you'll be okay, I hope you pay attention. I hope you don't wait until the storage unit to understand what they were doing. I almost did. I'm glad I got the bill.